extremely popular recently, and that's compliance in the cloud. So most of you out there know me. My name is Mark Szotkowski. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at RapidScale, and I'm really happy to introduce you to our Director of Compliance, Laura O'Grady, today. Laura will be leading our webinar this morning or this afternoon, again, depending on where you're at. And as always, we have a few housekeeping items for you to share with you before we get going today. So this webinar is being recorded. The deck and the recording will be sent to all attendees via email over the next day. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please chat them in the Q&A panel, and we will chat them in the chat box, and we will have them answered for you during the Q&A at the end of the presentation today. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Laura, and welcome Laura to the channel. And Laura, talk to us about compliance.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mark, for the introduction. I'm very excited to talk to this group today about compliance, so I want to go ahead and jump in. I don't need to tell a group of sales professionals the importance of a compelling event, but let's make sure we're all on the same page. A compelling event is defined as a customer's business pain that needs to be solved by a certain date, or else something bad happens to the executive who owns solving that problem. Now, I'm sure you can come up with a number of different events that could meet that criteria, but to me, there's not a better fit than an organization's need for compliance. So what makes compliance a compelling event? Well, many companies are focused on digital transformation in one way or another, which is the use of new, fast, or frequently changing digital technology to solve problems. This includes implementing cloud services and increasing connectivity. With all of these changes, the volume of data is increasing, as well as the value of that data, which can create new business opportunities. This is all positive, but with these changes comes an increased complexity of the compliance requirements, and non-compliance can be devastating for an organization. And of course, it wouldn't be a presentation on compliance without touching on the effects of non-compliance. Because when we talk about bad things happening in our definition of compelling events, this is what we're referring to. So this isn't an all-encompassing list here, but I did just want to touch on a few of these. The first one is reputational loss. Certainly no one wants to be today or tomorrow's top news feature because of a big data breach. Second is high financial cost. Most people don't realize that the cost of non-compliance is over 2.5 times more expensive than the cost of compliance. I mean, if you let the number sink in for a minute, that's a pretty hefty number considering that the cost of compliance itself isn't cheap. Having compliance issues can also lead to additional audits, which are not only time-consuming, but costly. And finally, you have potential litigation. So clearly, we have some pain points here. So I wanted to dig in a little deeper on compliance drivers. While I don't expect this group to be a subject matter expert in all the potential compliance impacts that an organization can have, it can be helpful to understand what drives compliance in the privacy and security space. And I always think of this really in 3 buckets. The first is geographically driven requirements. So depending on where your customer is based and where it does business, compliance requirements may be introduced. For example, are they US based? Which states do they do business in? Do they target any international markets? When you talk about geographic-based regulatory requirements, you may hear terms such as CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act, or GDPR, which is the European Union's Global Data Protection Regulation. The second bucket we have here is the industry that the customer is in. So we talk a lot about HIPAA for our healthcare customers, or LBA for those that operate in the financial services space. These tend to be pretty straightforward. I mean, I think if you know that if you're dealing with a healthcare customer, you're going to be talking about HIPAA. It's really the third bucket that can introduce a level of uncertainty when you're talking with your customers. These are the compliance requirements that have been agreed to by a customer. So for example, a company processing payment cards may not only be required to comply with PCI, but they may also be contractually required to obtain a certain level of certification to evidence their PCI compliance. Another example would be a local government who receives federal funding and has contractually agreed to comply with NIST 853. It's this third bucket that can create surprises.
Hey, Laura, quick question for you. Both CCPA and GDPR, those are fairly new, aren't they?
Correct. So GDPR has been out now for a couple years, but it's still a relatively new. CCPA is quite interesting because it's a newer one and is still in the process of evolving. So I actually had a news alert yesterday that there's a been an extension provided by CCPA on certain requirements. And that's why some of these new offerings, they really do add some complexity because of the fact that just when you think you have your compliance set and you're good, there's new ones introduced.
Yeah, so it's a moving target, right?
Absolutely.
Again, great big governmental bodies like to make changes and stay employed. So I think for all of the audience today, guys, one of the things you need to be aware of is this isn't a set it and forget it, right? Compliance is constantly changing. Just like a customer's desktop as a service requirements are constantly changing. And, we've really built out our practices with Laura coming in to head them in the last year and a half. Because we realize how important this is to all of your customers who become our customers as well. Laura, one other question here, and it's about PCI DSSS, and you made a comment that I don't think a lot of people are aware of.
Mm-hmm.
First, they have to protect the credit cards, right? But then they have to be ready for the scrutiny of an audit, and that can be pretty challenging for a customer, can't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to say that you're compliant, right? Anyone can self-attest, but going through and actually having a third party come in and actually having you say and show what you do can be challenging and can be overwhelming, especially for some of our smaller companies. And that's where we can certainly help because we can take some of those requirements and when we have those that we work through, we can also provide some additional information to our customers on those to help it as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's any customer that takes credit cards and stores the information, right?
Correct. PCI is applicable to any company that processes, stores, transmits any credit card data. So what's interesting is you can be a merchant, which is the actual companies who are performing the activities, or like RapidScale, we're a service provider. So while we don't necessarily process the credit cards, we do store, so we would come into scope as a service provider.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Laura. I didn't mean to take you off your role here, but I thought CCPA is brand new to me, right? We've now ran into that with probably a dozen prospects in the last 6 to 12 months. So that's one that just wasn't on our radar. We didn't have it coming to us. And as we become larger and we expand where we serve our clients, we're going to be challenged with more and more of these. So I'll let you continue.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you bring up that point, Mark, as well, because, when putting together a list like this, it's nearly impossible to try to have this be an all-encompassing list, right? I mean, at the moment you have it updated and you stamp final on it, you have to make updates to it. And that's why compliance can be, so tricky and complex for organizations. But why I thought this was really important is because we don't expect everyone on this call to be an expert on compliance requirements, but it is important to have the discussion early in the process to really understand what your client's needs are, because we want to make sure not only are we the right fit for the customer, but also that we can create a compelling case for our services.
It makes perfect sense.
Perfect. So let's talk a little bit more about the discussion that needs to occur. In most cases, your customers will want to talk about how they know that their information is secure and better understand the technical controls that we have in place to protect their data. But keep in mind, security and compliance are related but separate. We should continue with those discussions on security and make sure that we also understand their compliance needs up front. And this is important as we want to make sure that we can meet their needs. So while there are many things that we do really well in the compliance space, we know that there are some things that we just don't do. A prime example of this are the compliance requirements in the federal government space. When you're talking to customers, you may hear terms such as FedRAMP, NIST 853, NIST 800-171, or CMMC. At this time, RapidScale doesn't comply with these requirements. So if that's a customer non-negotiable, it would be a showstopper. So I know I'm throwing a lot of acronyms around, but I think these are acronyms that you start to hear when you're talking to customers, and they become more familiar as you have these additional discussions. So what type of questions should you ask to get the conversation started? Did you have a question, Mark?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's really important that everybody understands that it doesn't mean they're a federal government agency.
Correct.
It's anybody who could be working with that agency is required to meet these compliances, right? And that could be, that's a curveball. If we think about it, it could be like anybody who is in trying to think like aerospace, right? Aerospace does a lot of work with the federal government in general, and they're probably going to be held to meet these requirements if we go to do business with them, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I went back to the last slide for exactly that reason. That's why that third bucket, contractual, is so important. You may be talking to a local government, which you would never expect that would have a need to comply with some of these federal requirements, but potentially because they've received federal funding, they've signed a contract that says that they have to agree with the federal agency requirements, and because of that, it would be someone that we wouldn't be able to meet their requirements. So that's why these discussions are so important up front, because sometimes you get some information that you just don't expect.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification, Laura.
Absolutely. So what I wanted to do is provide a list of questions here to help, start the conversation. These should be able to get you exactly what you need from the customer. So walking through these, are there any privacy and/or security requirements that you are obligated to meet? So that's going to catch not only, the first two buckets that we just talked about, it's also going to catch if they have any contractual requirements that we may not be aware of. Do you currently have any privacy and/or security certifications? Any planned in the future? Do you have any regularly scheduled audits that you participate in? This is really helpful because in a lot of cases, they're going to be looking to RapidScale to help them with their audits. And we want to make sure that we have a good understanding up front of what their needs may be. And then lastly, who currently handles your compliance requirements? I think this gives you a good indicator of how knowledgeable they are in the compliance space. Do they have any in-house teams that are responsible for this? It could be a formal compliance team. It could just be the IT manager. Do they outsource some of this to a third party? This is all helpful information to gather up front. And then once you have questions answered, it's much easier to respond to any concerns. And then we can figure out how to best meet their compliance needs. So when we talk about meeting their compliance needs, a key concept of that is shared responsibility. In the past, there was a common misconception that once a customer moved to the cloud, they could go ahead and hand off their compliance responsibilities to the cloud provider. And while that has mostly been debunked over the past few years, you can see from a 2019 McAfee report that 12% of the respondents believe that cloud service providers are solely responsible for securing their data. So that statistic even further reiterates the importance of these discussions, as RapidScale, like most cloud service providers, operates under a shared responsibility model. At the end of the day, the customer will always have final accountability for maintaining their organization's compliance, but having a clear delineation of the activities that drive compliance helps them to understand that better. At RapidScale, we do this in a number of ways. So we offer responsibility matrices for our products and services, so the division of responsibility is clear. We also have a team of solution engineers who, along with our implementation specialists, work with prospective customers to design and implement a solution that meets the customer's needs, and of course, are available to provide guidance along the way. Responsibilities are again agreed upon during the kickoff meeting. And last, but certainly not least, we have a SOC2 Type 2 report, which is performed annually and provided to customers to detail the security controls in place. These controls have been tested by a third-party auditor, and this allows customers to know that we've designed a security program to keep their data safe. I can personally vouch for the fact that this report has been provided to both prospective and existing customers across all of our major verticals, and it's been deemed so thorough that we rarely get additional questions once we've shared this report. It's definitely a powerful tool in our compliance arsenal. So what we'd like to do next is a quick exercise. I'll turn it over to Mark to introduce. Mark, are you there?
Well, yeah, I just like to talk to myself on mute, get a test run more before I'm out there in front of everybody.
I do that as well.
Thank you for having me notice that. Yes, so team, what we want to do here is we get pulled into calls with y'all constantly, right? And by the way, please pull us into calls with you when you have a customer who is discussing compliance. I think we've made it really clear today that these are moving targets. And while we do have some really good blanketed responses for some very common compliance questions, when your customer wants to go deep, unless you are a compliance expert, you really should bring in the vendor of choice who you're working with. Don't put yourself out there. As many of you know, you carry a consulting title. That creates liability for you if you were to say something wrong to a customer. So error and omission insurance webinar coming up in 2021. Just kidding, that's a bad joke. But we're gonna give you guys an example of a call that we had recently. And you know, it really is. The initial discussions were held over the last couple of weeks. The director of IT mentioned both HIPAA and PCI. The call today is to address a few questions from their compliance team. So this is a dialogue between their compliance team and our team. And when we get into a customer that's sizable, and I think you all would agree that 500 users of DaaS and IaaS, Desktop as a Service and Infrastructure as a Service, is a very sizable account for us. We will bring Laura and or her team members in to support you and to support us. Because again, we don't want any of our cloud solution consultants getting out there on a limb either and stating something wrong that could come back and bite all of us in the rear. So one of the first questions they asked, which was interesting, was, are you compliant with HIPAA? And Laura, I'll let you share what your response was.
Perfect. Well, yes, we have designed a security and privacy program to comply with the HIPAA requirements. We recognize our responsibilities as a business associate, and we have a business associate agreement that we can send you for signature. While we don't accept red lines to this document, it has been created to both meet the HIPAA requirements and be aligned with the services that we provide.
Yeah, and that was a great way to start the conversation, right? And Laura's answer to that question is textbook. Laura, why don't you share with the channel team out there what you shared with me about providers who claim to be HIPAA certified?
I always get a chuckle out of someone who says that they're HIPAA certified, because there is no such thing in existence. HIPAA does not have any certifying body that goes out and certifies against the framework. Now, there may be some independent audit firms that can come in and do an audit against the HIPAA framework, but that does not mean you're HIPAA certified. So we can certainly say that we are HIPAA compliant, but we never want to say that we're HIPAA certified, because it sounds as we don't know what we're doing.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that with us, Laura.
Sure.
And guys and gals out there, if you've got other providers who are saying they're HIPAA certified, I'm not going to say run for the hills, but it just does not exist. It doesn't exist from the HIPAA body themselves. But Laura explained it really well. They could have a third-party audit come in and say, hey, they meet all the framework and they've got that audit to show. They just may be using the wrong terminology. So the next question that was asked by their compliance team was, do you have a SOC 2 in place?
Sure, and the answer we provided is yes. On an annual basis, we have a third-party auditor review our security environment, and the result is a SOC 2 Type 2 audit. The current audit period runs from December 2019 to November 2020, and we typically receive the new report in February each year.
Fantastic. So I think everybody out there knows what a SOC 2 Type 2 report is, or SOC 2 Type 2 audit report is. If you don't, ask us, guys. Put it in the chat. We're happy to discuss it more in detail at the end here today. The next question was, hey, we also process credit cards and are currently working towards PCI certification or PCI compliance ourselves. How does RapidScale comply with PCI?
Right. Well, we acknowledge the fact that we're a service provider as defined by the PCI Security Standards Council. Similar to HIPAA, we have created a security program designed to comply with the PCI requirements. Currently, we can provide our SOC 2 report, which details the security controls that we have in place, and we're currently preparing for the PCI Level 1 Service Provider certification. While we can never guarantee the completion date for a first-year certification, we are planning to achieve this milestone before middle of 2021. Mark, do you have the next question?
Yeah, sorry, I was rambling on mute again. I said that question was really interesting because it allowed us to understand that the customer was going through their own PCI audit, right? And that led us to their next question. And that question was, Laura, do we have the ability to perform a periodic security audit against RapidScale?
Right. Well, and we do see this question a good amount. The purpose of a SOC 2 report is to audit once and report to many. And we've made our report thorough enough so that our customers can review the controls in place that have been audited independently. If there are any topics that are not covered by the report, such as configurations unique to your specific environment, we can either show you how to obtain the information on your own or pull it for you.
Yeah, and of course, this customer was a little relentless. They didn't let up. They said the next question to us was, how can RapidScale help us get through our upcoming audit?
Yes, exactly. Well, we certainly expect that the auditor is going to have questions on the services provided by RapidScale, which is why we can provide you our SOC 2 report, and it can be used by your auditor to gain comfort of the controls we have in place. If there's any audit areas not covered by the SOC 2 report, you just need to open a ticket to support, and we can help you determine what else may be needed. In most cases, the SOC 2 has been sufficient on its own.
Yeah, and guys, guys and gals out there in our audience listening today, these are pretty hard and fast rules that RapidScale runs by, as will the majority of your other reputable providers. And we have to do this to scale, right? We can't allow ourselves to get dragged into every customer and helping them through what they need to do. And it shows that most customers who are very knowledgeable around this, they almost check the box with us when we provide the SOC 2 Type 2 report, because they understand that that's going to pretty much check the box for them with their auditor. But this customer did not give up. They had one more question for Laura. If we want to perform a penetration test of your environment, can we do that?
Great. As mentioned, we've purposely made our SOC 2 report thorough enough to cover the security controls our customers are concerned about, and that does include our annual pen test that is performed. For this reason, we can provide a copy of the SOC 2 report, which will show that a pen test was performed and reviewed by an independent auditor. I'd be happy to get you a copy of that latest SOC 2 report with a signed MNDA.
Right. So guys, this is. I mean, I think they might have gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole with us. Laura and I communicated after the call, and we realized that this customer is under a lot of pressure to complete their first PCI audit, and they were really looking for help. And they probably hadn't gone through this at the level that they were expecting to. And at the end of the day, when Laura freed herself from the call, the customer actually made a comment and said, well, it looks like we can check the box on compliance with RapidScale. So even though they were a tough customer, and I think Laura will agree that they didn't let go of the bone, at the end of the day, they did respect and understand all of our answers to their questions. With that, Laura, I'll let you close us out for the day.
Perfect. Well, and that was the final question that we had. I did want to make a note that after the call, we're going to be sending out the slides for your reference, as well as some additional material, including the detailed Q&A that I just went through, so that you can have some of those standard answers. We're also going to be providing some detailed contact information that you'll see on this last slide. And, as we get to the slide, I did want to leave enough time for questions, so I hope you've been chatting them over using the Q&A panel. I did want to close out the presentation with a final thought, which is that compliance requirements are going to continue to grow in complexity. So having discussions early is going to be key. But remember, you're not in this alone. If you need additional support, start with your regional CSE to further discuss how to approach your clients and prospects. I've included a map here, which has been shown in the past to detail the CSE by region. The CSEs will also escalate any specific questions to me, and it's my commitment to the channel that I'll get you a response very quickly, whether it's more detailed information on a compliance offering that you're not as familiar with, or if you need additional information on how we meet certain requirements. I want to make sure that I get you what you need to be successful. So on that note, let's see if there are any questions I can help address today. Summer, do you have any that has come through?
Yes, good thing we have time because we have plenty. I will just kick it off for both of you. First up, we are seeing a fast increase in ADA compliance with websites in our industry that's driving a lot of litigation. Have you faced this yet, and is it on your radar?
We have not gone through the ADA because of we not having the website. We do have the portal, which I can look into a little further. The ADA requirements are very specific, and it is something that we can certainly address in the future going forward. It's pretty straightforward, but I can talk internally to the team on that. But that's a great point to raise up. It's an important point to bring up too, because if you are out in the field and you're hearing things that you haven't heard before, like the ADA requirements for the sites, let me know so that we can make sure that we get ahead of that.
Excellent. Next up, question about PCI DSS. If a prospect says that the company who provides the credit card processing machine says they are PCI compliant, is that a correct statement from the prospect?
Yes, I'll say yes, it could be. There's no reason to challenge that. But with the payment card processor being PCI, there may still be some shared responsibility to ensure that the customer's requirements are met for PCI. So if you have a situation like that's a little bit more nuanced, we can certainly discuss that further. But I wouldn't have any reason to believe, based on the information provided, that wouldn't be a true statement.
Great. And since you offered earlier, Mark, a couple people chatted in wondering if you guys can elaborate on what Sock2 Type 2 is.
Sure. So a Sock2 report is a report that has been, the framework is provided by the ACPA. So when you think of those board of accountants, and a Sock2 report is a service organization control report, which is basically was created back in the day, not to age ourselves here, but you may have heard SAS 70 referenced. These are reports that are created that when you have a service organization that has many customers, rather than having all the customers come in and do individual audits, because that would basically overtake your operations, you do the report once and you can provide it to all of your customers. Now, there's a difference between a Type 1 and a Type 2 report. Customers really want a Sock2 Type 2 report because a Type 2 report covers a period of time. So as I mentioned, ours covers from November through December, whereas a Type 1 report is a point in time. So it'll basically say, as of today, these are the controls that are in place. As you can imagine, just having a single point in time does not provide as much assurance as a customer would get if we're saying that we're covering this over an entire year. So that's really the differences between them.
Great. And this one says, Mark, hello, buddy. Are you saying PCI compliance does have an official certification?
Yes. So PCI, there is such a thing as PCI certification. There are various levels of certification for the merchant. As I discussed before, you could either be a merchant or you can be a service provider. From a merchant perspective, you can be certified, I think it's among 5 levels. For Rapid Scale, being a service provider, there are actually 2 levels, and the PCI certification that we're going for is the highest level of certification so that we can meet all of the customers' demands.
Great, and I'm just going to keep going.
Great.
Do these reports pertain to just infrastructure-related items?
I'm assuming the report you're referring to is the Sock2 report. And yeah, so the Sock2 report covers our infrastructure as well as our management's network. It wouldn't be feasible to perform a Sock2 that covers all of the individual client environments because the configurations could be different. But when we use a SOC 2 to cover the infrastructure and the management's network, as well as the shared controls that cover things like the governance and the shared controls across customers, you're actually getting probably the bulk of the controls that would be in scope. And so, as I mentioned earlier, anything that's not covered by a SOC 2 report that would be specific to the customer environment, if they are interested in that information, we can help get them. Either we can pull the information for them or we can show them how to pull it themselves.
Awesome. And I see some asking for fourth-party due diligence info. Have you seen an increase in that as well? And how much more complex does that make things?
Yeah, we haven't really, I don't know if necessarily we'd say that we've seen an uptick. I think it's been something that's been around, especially just with an increased focus on vendor due diligence in general. It's been a couple years now. Everyone always liked to point back to the Target breach, which happened because of a third party. And so certainly the due diligence requirements have been continually extending. But I wouldn't say there's been an uptick, but we're certainly capable of handling all of the requests that come in for information.
Cool. And I'll just ask a couple more so we don't go too over.
Sure.
What happens if a business is breached? Is all the credit processing stopped? Who has to be brought in to deal with that?
That's actually a very complex question because a breach can mean many different things. I'm hearing in the wording of the question that you're specifically talking about a organization that would be PCI compliant. I think that's actually a really difficult question to answer as it is. There's so many factors that come into play. I will say that when there is a potential security incident, we want to know about those, whether it's, internal to RapidScale, whether it's at our customers. We want to know what's going on with it. We want to make sure that the right resources are involved. Here at RapidScale, we have a very thorough incident response process. We have a lot of resources available to us, so we can react very quickly and determine what potential impacts may occur from that. So I can't really answer that question directly because it is really incident by incident, but we are certainly prepared to handle anything like that.
Awesome. And we'll wrap up with, if we want the Sock2 report, how do we request that?
Perfect. Well, I'm always happy to give that out because I do think it is really a powerful tool for our customers and our prospects. If you do need the Sock2 report, just reach out to your CSC. We'll need the customer name, the person's name at the customer requesting the report, as well as their title. And if it's a prospect, also a fully executed MNDA. So send that over to your CSC, they'll get it to me, and I will make sure that I turn those around quickly. I will say every time that you have a need for a client to request it, it does have to be a new request. So you can't hold the Sock2 and send it to customers as they ask. You do need to put in a new request each time.
Yeah, Summer, I'm going to chime in because that question to me sounded as though it may be one of our partners asking for a copy of our Sock2 Type 2. If that's the case, just reach out to me directly, whomever put in that request, and we'll walk you through it. But it's not our policy to provide our Sock2 Type 2 to our partners based on what Laura just said. It's not that we don't trust you guys, but we have to control our own internal compliance, and we have to know every customer that Sock2 Type 2 has gone to. So we really can't let that go out into the wild. And while you would sign an NDA with us to get a copy of it, it's just against our policy today to do that. If you want to discuss it further, I'm happy to have that conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Mark, because that's actually not even a RapidScale policy. That's actually, as I mentioned earlier, Sock2 report is under the framework of the AICPA. It's a restricted use report. We're required to track every company that we release it to, and end users must only be users of the service. And so we need to be very diligent to ensure that we're following the process because it could put our certification into jeopardy. So,
yeah, see, even a better answer than my answer, Laura. That's why you're on the call.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, guys, I hope everybody enjoyed the call today. If it created more questions for you, that's what your CSC team is here for. And we'll be as open with you as we can be. We continue to get bigger and get stronger and get larger as a company, and we have to be more diligent in our own internal controls. But we're here to work with you, and we're here to provide these services to your customers. I hope at the end of the call today, you feel as though it's a great place to bring a customer who has compliance needs. We really are ahead of the game. So thank you, Laura, so much for running the call today. As always, thank you, Summer. I forgot to mention you were on the call, and Nikki as well. Thank you guys for being supportive of the call today. And we'll catch you all next month. And Summer, what's our webinar next month?
We are going to be talking about solution selling.
I love it. So this is one you don't want to miss. We're going to give you guys a lot of tools to go out there and blow the doors off of your competitors in selling cloud. So hopefully you put this one on the calendar as soon as Summer and team sends it out. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your morning and or afternoon. And let's close out September strong and the third quarter strong for those of us on a fiscal year. We'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.